You know how it is. You've sent us these fascinating historical texts in this case, excerpts from Jeremiah, because you want to cut through the noise and understand the real turning points, the decisions that echo through history. You want to grasp the essence without getting lost in endless detail. Well, that's exactly what we're doing today.
Taking a deep dive.
We're taking a deep dive into a truly pivotal moment that you've highlighted, a moment right after everything has been, well, shattered.
That's right. The source material you provided comes from the biblical book of Jeremiah, specifically chapters 40 through 42.
Okay.
Think of it as an immediate dispatch from the aftermath of the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem. A raw look at what happens when the dust settles, you know.
Picture this scene that emerges from the text you've shared. Jerusalem is in ruins. Countless people have been exiled.
Yeah, the main exile.
But as we read here, not everyone was taken. A remnant is left behind in Judah amidst the devastation. The air must have been thick with fear, uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. And this profound need for some kind of direction forward.
And that's the core of what we'll be exploring in this deep dive, based on the material you sent.
Right. Our mission is to understand the critical decisions and the stark warnings presented to the people who remained in Judah.
Okay.
We'll be examining what these passages reveal about leadership in a crisis, the true weight of the choices made, and the very real consequences that followed in such a fractured time.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting right where your source material does, with Jeremiah himself.
Good place to start.
In Jeremiah chapter 40, we see him being released by Nebuzaradan, the Babylonian captain of the bodyguard.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where it gets really interesting right off the bat. This Babylonian official acknowledges that it was the Lord, Jeremiah's God, who brought about this disaster,
Yeah.
just as Jeremiah had prophesied. What does that strike you as?
Well, what's fascinating here, and it's a detail you've pointed us to, is this recognition from the conquering power itself.
Yeah.
The role of prophecy and divine judgment in these events, it's almost a concession. You, Jeremiah, in your warnings were right all along. Nebuzaradan then gives Jeremiah a significant choice, as your source notes. Go to Babylon with good provisions, or stay here in Judah.
And Jeremiah, as the text shows us, chooses to stay. He opts to remain in Judah with
Gedaliah, yeah.
who has been appointed by the king of Babylon to govern what's left of the cities.
Which really underscores the devastation, doesn't it? When you consider that the most powerful entity in the region had to appoint someone to oversee the remnants.
Exactly. Gedaliah represents this fragile attempt to piece things back together.
Absolutely. And as you've highlighted, Gedaliah wasn't just anyone. The text mentions his lineage, son of Ahikam and grandson of Shaphan.
Right, that name Shaphan rings a bell.
Families that had a history of influence and even of protecting Jeremiah at times. So the Babylonians likely saw him as someone who could provide a degree of stability.
Makes sense.
And perhaps be more amenable to their rule. It's also worth noting, as your source material details, that Jeremiah is given a ration and a gift by the Babylonians.
A gift.
Yeah. It's a small detail, but it speaks to a certain level of respect, however complicated they held for him.
Now, as we move through chapter 40, verses 7 through 12, news of Gedaliah's appointment begins to spread, and we see this gathering.
Right, people start coming back.
Commanders of various forces who had been out in the field, along with Jewish people who had sought refuge in neighboring lands like Moab, Ammon, Edom, all these people, drawn by the news you've shared, return to Gedaliah at Mizpah.
And the text even names some of them.
We even get a list of some of these commanders: Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, Johanan, and Jonathan, sons of Kareah, and several others. It's like the first stirrings of regrouping after a catastrophe.
This return, as your source points out, really does offer a glimpse of hope, a natural human desire for community and rebuilding after immense loss.
So what does Gedaliah do?
Well, Gedaliah's response at this point is crucial. He urges them, as the text records, not to fear serving the Chaldeans. That's another name for the Babylonians, as we see in your notes.
Okay, serve the conquerors.
His focus is on practical survival and restoration. Stay in the land and serve the king of Babylon so that it may go well for you. He encourages them to get to work, gathering essential resources like wine, summer fruit, and oil.
Basic necessities.
Exactly. He also assures them that he will remain in Mizpah to act as the representative before the Babylonian authorities.
Kind of like a liaison.
Precisely.
And it seems, from what you've given us, that there's some initial success.
It does. The text notes they gathered wine and summer fruit in great abundance. It paints a picture of a community trying to find its footing again, working with what little they have left.
But this fragile sense of progress doesn't last, does it? It's soon overshadowed by a dangerous threat.
Indeed. As we move into chapter 40, verses 13 through 16, and then the beginning of chapter 41, the narrative takes a dark turn that you've highlighted.
Okay, what happens?
Johanan and the other commanders approach Gedaliah with a grave warning.
The same Johanan from before.
The very same. They tell him about a plot orchestrated by Baalis, the king of Ammon,
The Ammonites again.
who has dispatched Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, to assassinate him. This is a direct assault on the already tenuous stability.
Ishmael. Wasn't he one of the commanders who came back to Gedaliah?
He was. That's part of the betrayal.
Wow. And Gedaliah's reaction, reading through this part of your source material, is, well, it's a fatal misjudgment, isn't it?
Completely. He simply dismisses the warning. He doesn't believe them.
Why? It makes you wonder about his mindset at this point. Was he perhaps weary of conflict, or did he simply trust too easily in this volatile situation?
That's a key question your source material raises implicitly. Gedaliah's dismissal serves as a stark reminder that even leaders in seemingly stable positions, though his was anything but stable, can be susceptible to overconfidence.
Or denial, maybe.
Or denial, or an inability to conceive of the depths of betrayal, especially in fractured and uncertain times. Johanan even offers to handle the situation discreetly.
How so?
He says, "Let me go kill Ishmael secretly, no one will know."
Wow, okay.
But Gedaliah forbids it, even accusing Johanan of spreading lies. This refusal to heed a credible threat has devastating consequences.
And those consequences arrive swiftly and brutally.
In the 7th month, Ishmael, accompanied by 10 men, comes to Gedaliah in Mizpah while they are sharing a meal, an act of fellowship that's chillingly betrayed.
Eating together, gosh.
They rise up and murder Gedaliah, the very governor appointed by the king of Babylon. It's an act of stark defiance, and you can imagine the shockwaves it sent through the remaining community.
Chaos.
And the treachery, as your source details, doesn't stop there. Ishmael also murders all the Jewish people who were with Gedaliah, as well as the Chaldean soldiers stationed in Mizpah.
So she takes out everyone.
Everyone who was right there. This act eliminates not just the appointed leader, but also representatives of both the remaining Jewish community and the Babylonian authority. It plunges the region into further chaos and underscores the extreme vulnerability of this small remaining population that you've drawn our attention to.
Chapter 41 continues with even more horrifying details from the text you've provided.
It gets worse, unfortunately.
The day after Gedaliah's murder, 80 men arrive from Shechem, Shiloh, and Samaria, completely unaware of the tragedy.
They have no idea.
They're coming with offerings for the house of the Lord, displaying traditional signs of mourning. Shaved beards, torn clothes, and gashed bodies. It paints a picture of a people still clinging to their traditions, even in the face of such devastation.
And what's particularly disturbing, as you've pointed out, is Ishmael's calculated deception.
What does he do?
He goes out to meet them, weeping, feigning shared grief, and invites them to see Gedaliah. Come, see Gedaliah.
Oh no, that's just cruel. It's a truly cruel manipulation of their sorrow and their expectations.
And the result, as the text makes clear, is a horrific massacre.
He kills them too.
Ishmael and his men slaughter 70 of these unsuspecting pilgrims and throw their bodies into a cistern.
A cistern, like a well.
Exactly. One that was historically significant, built by King Asa centuries earlier, as your notes indicate. Only 10 survive.
How?
By offering Ishmael their hidden stores of food, they basically bribe him for their lives with wheat, barley, oil, and honey.
Unbelievable. It really brings home the lawlessness and the sheer brutality of the time.
This detail about the cistern, built by King Asa to defend against Baasha, king of Israel, adds a layer of tragic irony to the historical context you've provided.
A place for defense becomes a mass grave.
Exactly. Following this atrocity, Ishmael takes the remaining people in Mizpah captive, including the king's daughters and officials.
Wait, the king's daughters were there.
Apparently, yes, those left behind. And he intends to flee to the Ammonites, the very ones who instigated the plot against Gedaliah, as we recall from your earlier points.
Right, back to his sponsors. But Ishmael's reign of terror is short-lived, thankfully.
Thankfully, yes. Johanan and the other commanders, hearing about his horrific actions, immediately pursue him, as the text recounts.
So Johanan didn't give up.
No, he rallies the forces. They catch up with him at the large pool in Gibeon. Can you imagine the relief of the captives at that moment?
Oh, absolutely. Seeing Johanan must have felt like salvation.
The reaction of the captives upon seeing Johanan and his forces, as described in your source material, is telling. They are overjoyed. They immediately turn back and go with Johanan.
They abandon Ishmael.
Instantly. It speaks volumes about the fear and desperation they must have endured under Ishmael's control and the hope that Johanan represented.
Ishmael himself, however, manages to escape
He does, with just 8 men. Slips away.
and flees to the Ammonites, leaving behind the people he had taken.
Right. So Johanan and his forces recover the remaining population, soldiers, women, children, and officials, and they gather in Geruth Chimhem near Bethlehem.
Near Bethlehem. Okay, so not back to Mizpah.
No. And crucially, they head towards Egypt. They don't stay put.
Why Egypt?
They're driven by a very real fear of retribution from the Chaldeans because of Gedaliah's assassination.
Because Babylon appointed Gedaliah. His murder looks like rebellion.
Precisely. They fear collective punishment. This decision seems pivotal, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. Their fear is entirely understandable, given the brutal realities they've just witnessed. Gedaliah was appointed by Babylon, and his murder could easily be interpreted as a direct act of rebellion.
Potentially leading to swift and severe repercussions. However, their decision to flee to Egypt, as your source material leads us to, sets the stage for the critical events we find in chapter 42.
Which brings us to the final part of this deep dive into the text you've shared. In chapter 42, we see all the commanders, including Johanan and Jezaniah and all the people from the least to the greatest,
Everyone.
approaching Jeremiah for guidance. They are a small remnant, acutely aware of their reduced numbers, and they urgently plead with Jeremiah to pray to the Lord for direction. It feels like they've reached the end of their own ability to decide.
Their request, as the text presents it, appears to be sincere. They ask Jeremiah to seek God's will for them,
Okay.
even making a solemn promise to obey whatever is revealed, regardless of whether it is pleasant or unpleasant.
They really lay it on thick, don't they? Whatever you say, we'll do.
They do. This moment of seeking divine counsel in the face of overwhelming uncertainty really stands out in your source material.
Jeremiah agrees. And after 10 days, the word of the Lord comes to him.
10 days. A long wait when you're scared.
Yeah, the message is quite clear, as you've pointed out in the outline. If they choose to stay in Judah, God promises to rebuild them and have compassion. They're explicitly told not to fear the king of Babylon because God will be with them to save and deliver them. It sounds like a lifeline offered in the midst of despair.
This promise of restoration, however, comes with a significant condition: their willingness to obey and remain in the land.
Stay put, don't run.
Right. God even directly addresses their fear of Babylon, offering reassurance. But as your source highlights, the message also presents a stark and terrifying alternative.
Exactly. If they choose to go to Egypt out of fear of war, hunger, and the sound of the trumpet, then those very things, ironically, will overtake them in Egypt.
The very things they're fleeing from.
They are warned in no uncertain terms that they will die by sword, famine, or plague, with no survivors. God explicitly commands them not to go to Egypt, using the recent destruction of Jerusalem as a haunting parallel. It's a powerful and direct warning.
And at this point, Jeremiah delivers a powerful, almost accusatory message based on the text you shared.
What does he say?
He essentially suggests that they're deceiving themselves,
So.
that their strong vow to obey God's words seems to contradict their predetermined plan to flee to Egypt. He basically says, you asked me to pray, but you'd already decided, hadn't you?
Oof. Calling them out.
He reiterates the grim consequences of disobedience: death by sword, famine, or plague in the very place where they are seeking refuge. It raises the question of how willing they truly were to follow divine guidance if it conflicted with their own fears.
So bringing it all together, taking this deep dive into Jeremiah 40:42, based on the excerpts you provided, we see this incredibly critical juncture.
A real turning point.
The people left in Judah were facing unimaginable hardship and were forced to make agonizing decisions about leadership, safety, and their entire future.
We witness the vital importance of heeding warnings, a lesson underscored by Gedaliah's tragic disbelief.
Yeah, that really stands out.
Your source material vividly illustrates the brutal consequences of betrayal and the extreme vulnerability of a community struggling to rebuild. Yet we also see resilience.
Like with Johanan.
Exactly. Resilience in the absence of Johanan and a yearning for direction in their appeal to Jeremiah.
And ultimately, it shines a light on that timeless struggle between fear and faith. The people earnestly seek God's guidance, promising obedience, yet their deep-seated fear of Babylon appears to be pulling them towards Egypt. It really makes you think about how often our own fears might cloud the very guidance we seek.
Absolutely. This historical account, rooted in a specific time and place that you've brought to our attention, offers profound insights into human behavior under immense pressure.
It really does.
It speaks to the complex challenges of rebuilding after trauma and the enduring relevance of seeking wise counsel, both from human sources and from, well, a sense of higher purpose.
Considering the weight of Jeremiah's warning and the people's initial commitment to obey, it really leaves you pondering what truly motivated their request for guidance in the first place.
Were they just looking for confirmation? Or maybe hoping for an easier answer?
Right, and what must have been going through their minds as they heard such a stark prophecy, one that directly challenged the path they seemed determined to take. It's a powerful point to consider long after our deep dive today.